Benny learns to share. Benny the bear had just moved to a new part of the woods with his family. Starting at a new school made him nervous, but there was one thing he was sure about: he loved honey. On his first day, his mom packed him a big jar of golden honey, his favorite treat. As Benny walked into the cozy forest school, he clutched the jar tightly, hoping it would bring him comfort in this unfamiliar place. During snack time, Benny proudly opened his jar of honey. His new classmates, Ruby the rabbit, Timmy the turtle, and Sammy the squirrel, took out their snacks, too. Ruby had crunchy carrots, Timmy had a fresh salad, and Sammy had acorns. Ruby leaned over with a smile and asked, "Can I try some of your honey, Benny?" Benny hugged the jar closer and said, "No, it's mine." Ruby's smile faded, but she didn't say anything. As the week went on, Benny continued to keep his honey to himself. When Sammy offered him an acorn, Benny shook his head and said, "I don't like acorns." He noticed his classmates sharing their snacks and laughing together, but Benny always sat alone. "He's nice, but he doesn't share," Ruby whispered one day. Benny overheard and felt a pang of loneliness, though he didn't know how to change things. His honey was special to him, and he didn't want to give it up. One day, Mrs. Owl, the teacher, announced an exciting event, the Friendship Feast. The classroom buzzed as Mrs. Owl explained that everyone would bring their favorite food to share with the class. Ruby clapped her paws, declaring she'd bring fresh carrots from her family garden. Sammy proudly said he'd gather the biggest, crunchiest acorns. Even Timmy, who was usually shy, smiled and offered to bring greens from the pond. Benny, however, sat quietly, clutching his honey jar under the desk. In the days leading up to the feast, everyone excitedly shared their plans. Ruby told the class about picking carrots with her siblings, describing how they raced to pull the biggest ones. Sammy bragged about climbing tall trees to find the perfect acorns, narrowly avoiding an angry woodpecker. Timmy even shared a funny story about slipping into the pond while collecting greens. Benny stayed quiet, unsure what to say. When asked, he mumbled, "My honey," then quickly changed the subject. Finally, the day of the feast arrived. Benny walked into the classroom, holding his honey jar tightly. A long table was covered with colorful plates of food. Ruby had arranged her carrots like little towers, Sammy had stacked his acorns in neat piles, and Timmy's greens sat in a basket lined with lily pads. Benny placed his honey jar at the far end of the table and sat nearby. He watched nervously as the others eagerly swapped snacks and laughed together. As the feast began, Ruby handed out carrots, giggling as Sammy pretended they were drumsticks. Sammy passed around acorns and challenged Timmy to crack one open with his beak. Benny noticed his classmates dipping their snacks into each other's food. Ruby tried an acorn with greens and called it the crunchiest salad ever. Sammy dipped a carrot into a jar of honey that Timmy brought, but it wasn't as golden or rich as Benny's honey. Benny stayed quiet, feeling unsure. The room filled with laughter, but Benny felt lonelier than ever. He sat back in his chair, staring at his untouched honey jar, wishing he could join in. Mrs. Owl noticed Benny sitting by himself and walked over. "Benny," she said gently, "sharing isn't about losing what you love. It's about gaining something better, connections with others. Why don't you let them try your honey? You might be surprised." Benny hesitated but trusted Mrs. Owl's advice. With a deep breath, Benny picked up his honey jar, walked to the table, and said, Does anyone want to try my honey? His classmates' faces lit up with excitement. Ruby was the first to dip a carrot into the golden honey. Her eyes widened as she exclaimed, "This is the best honey I've ever tasted." Sammy eagerly dipped an acorn and called it better than tree sap. Timmy drizzled some over his greens, giving Benny a happy thumbs up. For the first time, Benny felt a warm happiness that had nothing to do with honey. His classmates cheered for his delicious treat, smiling as they shared their snacks with him. Benny finally felt like part of the group. Encouraged by their enthusiasm, he tried new foods for the first time. Ruby handed him a carrot, and he realized it wasn't bad with a little honey. Sammy convinced him to taste an acorn, and Timmy shared his salad. The classroom buzzed with laughter and chatter. Benny smiled, realizing that sharing didn't mean losing something. It meant gaining the joy of giving and making friends. His honey jar, once something he kept to himself, was now the center of the celebration. Benny looked around the table, feeling like he belonged for the first time. The feast continued, and Benny found himself enjoying every moment. From that day on, Benny started sharing his honey during snack time, and his classmates shared their snacks with him. He discovered that acorns weren't so bad with a drizzle of honey, and even carrots were surprisingly tasty. Benny loved feeling like part of the group. Soon, he wasn't just the new bear in school, he was a real friend. He didn't need to hold onto his honey so tightly anymore. He had something sweeter: friendship. And that's the end of the story about Benny the bear, the little cub who didn't know how to share but learned how wonderful it can be. Thanks to his friends and a little courage, Benny discovered that sharing doesn't mean losing. It means gaining smiles, laughter, and the warmth of friendship. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to join us for more fun and exciting stories in the next video here on Blue Opossum Channel. See you soon.